everyone. Thank you for joining me for today's devotional. Haven't you loved this series on the promises of God? I mean, it's been so encouraging for me just to learn about all of these promises that we can hold on to as Christians. You know, today we're going to read Joshua chapter 6, verses 3 through 5, and it says, "You and your fighting men should march around the town once a day for 6 days. 7 priests will walk ahead of the ark, each carrying a ram's horn. On the 7th day, you are to march around the town 7 times, with the priests blowing the horns. When you hear the priests give one long blast on the ram's horns, have all the people shout as loud as they can. Then the walls of the town will collapse, and the people can charge straight into the town." Has God ever asked you to do something crazy for him? Something that really didn't make sense to you? Maybe it was financially. God told you to give a large amount of money to somebody, or even to the 320 offering at our church. And you're like, God, are you sure? Like this amount, like this is wiping my savings. You know, have you ever been there where God asked you to do something crazy? Maybe you were, maybe God prompted you to start a business or to get a new job and a new career path. And all he told you to do was put in your 2 weeks notice without knowing anything else. That can be a scary place, but sometimes God asks us to do things that are just not conventional. You know, here in this part of Joshua's story, we see Joshua and his warriors hearing from God on how to conquer the city of Jericho. You know, this was a fortified city, which would have meant that it was very difficult to conquer. You know, the instructions that God gave Joshua would have been very odd and confusing to Joshua in this day and age. He was a skilled warrior. He had been in many battles. He knew how to fight. He was a fighter. He had that experience. He would have known exactly what to do to go in and win the battle. But look what God asked him to do. He says, "You fighting men." So he acknowledges that he knows that Joshua knows what to do. "You should march around the town." And I read the rest of it, what else he told him to do. But it's so funny that these men were trained to fight, and then God tells them to march. It's like so different, so passive. It's so strange, especially for an experienced warrior who is, you know, skilled in battle, just to go march around in a circle. But what we learn from Joshua in this passage is that in order to possess the promises of God, we have to be obedient to whatever God says, even if it doesn't make sense, especially when it doesn't make sense, because that's when God shows up for us. You know, if they had tried to conquer the city in their own way, they would have failed. But because they had obeyed God, they had victory. This is why it's so important for us to be obedient. It's so important for us to learn the voice of God, to learn how God speaks to us, and then to obey God, to do what God says, because he alone is in control and he knows exactly what we need. You know, I can think of a time in my life where I was kind of like at a crossroads, and in a similar situation where I was newly saved. I was just started walking with Jesus, and I was still at LSU in college. And, you know, I felt like God had asked me to come to Healing Place College, or back then it was called Healing Place School of Ministry. Shout out if you're watching and you were in Healing Place School of Ministry. I remember being so torn, like, God, you know, which way do I need to go? And I remember I was so young in my faith, I didn't know how to pray. And I remember asking God, can you just make the wrong decision ugly? That's all I knew what to do. Just let me know that I know that it's not the right decision. And I'll never forget being at LSU, and it seemed like I failed every test. I was just miserable in every way. A number of things were against me. It was just ugly. And I knew without the shadow of a doubt that God was telling me to come to Healing Place School of Ministry. And what's so funny is that I knew that God was telling me to be obedient, but it was not conventional. Like the conventional thing for me to do would be to finish college, you know, stay on the path that I'm on and get my degree and then get a job somewhere. But I felt like God was telling me to do something different. And so I'm just so thankful that I decided to obey God in that moment because it led me to where I'm at now. It led me to this church where I've learned how to grow in my faith, where I've learned how to heal through past hurts. This led me to Chris. We got married after being in this college. It led me to to the job that I have today. Just this house has meant so much to me. And I'm so thankful for the promises of God that have come out of that step of obedience. I think about how immature I was, saying, God, I don't know, just make it ugly. Like, make it so I can't miss it. That's the way that I needed God to move for me, and he did. What is God asking you to do today? How do you naturally respond when God asks you to do something that you're not used to or something that doesn't make sense? Do you respond in fear? I know I tend to at times. It can be so hard to just trust God, especially when it doesn't look like something you would do. I struggle with this. I'll be like, God, are you sure? Like, give me another sign. How many of you are like this? Give me another sign, God. And it's like, I've already lit the bush on fire. I've already, done the airplane in the sky, telling you exactly where to go. But, my goal is, as a Christian, to grow in my trust in God. That it would be easier and easier for me to say yes to God no matter what he asks. And I hope it's the same for you. I hope this has been an encouragement to you today. We'll see you back here tomorrow.